We are less than 3 weeks away from college football. Mark Rogers TV trying to get to as many teams as possible, and this is one of the staples of college football. So we've got to check in with the Oklahoma Sooners, and of course, to do so, we've got to talk to Matt Hofeld of Crimson and Cream Machine on the SB Nation platform for Oklahoma athletics. Matt, it's been a while. Hope you've had a nice summer.
Yeah, man, it has been a while. And the summer it went like all summers do. Went by too fast, but football can't get here fast enough, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and we didn't coordinate, but I like that you've got Oklahoma colors on for the big preview here. So
yeah, that was totally just coincidental, by the way.
That's good stuff. So at quarterback, of course, Trevor Knight looked to be the guy, especially after the performance 2 years ago down the stretch. Baker Mayfield, of course, has plenty of reps under his belt at Texas Tech. Can you kind of compare and contrast these guys, as we don't know exactly right now who's going to be the guy?
Yeah, this is definitely the position battle in camp that everyone is looking at. Everyone's wanting information on. And typical Bob Stoops, there's not a whole lot of information coming out on these guys. The Sooners did have a scrimmage yesterday, 90-minute scrimmage. I do know there were some touchdowns thrown. I know one of those was Trevor Knight to tight end Mark Andrews. I know there was an interception thrown, but no one's talking about who threw the interception. So good luck getting a name there. But I think it's going to come down probably another week or so of really getting these guys a good look. The advantage I think Baker Mayfield has over Trevor Knight is Baker Mayfield has already excelled in this type of offense. Everyone's learning an offense for the very first time under new offensive coordinator Lincoln Riley. But Baker Mayfield has already been a part of an offense like this when he played at Texas Tech in 2013. And so maybe that's an advantage over the field of competition. But I also say that I wouldn't overlook Cody Thomas, who everyone kind of puts him as third in this competition. But I would say I wouldn't be surprised, honestly, if Cody Thomas finished even as the backup, as the number 2 guy, and one of either Mayfield or Trevor Knight finished really with the number 3 position.
It's kind of interesting that, of course, she ran this kind of offense for several years near the end of the Sam Bradford reign. And then, wow, I'm blanking out on the next quarterback who set tons of records for you.
Yeah, he's a guy that, and it's crazy. We talked about this on our very own podcast just last week, that Landry Jones was one of those quarterbacks who is, a record-setting, a record-holding quarterback at the University of Oklahoma, had a winning record against Texas, had a winning bowl record, and yet Oklahoma fans just can't stand the guy, and it's kind of crazy. But one of the things I mentioned on our podcast is they sure would like to have a guy who could complete passes now, and that's definitely what fit the mold for Landry Jones.
That's crazy. This is what's funny, Matt. My son's name is Landry, and I couldn't remember Landry Jones' name.
We'll just say you forgot the last name. How's that?
Very good. Let's say that. The backfield seems to be the one stacked position on the team. Samaje Perine, of course, we know what he did last year, was just a complete beast as a freshman. Joe Mixon, a 5-star recruit. Alex Ross has all the speed in the world. How do they use all these guys?
Well, and that's an interesting thing, because I'm also hearing that Daniel Brooks is getting a lot of looks at the running back position. A freshman named Rodney Anderson is getting some looks. Running back is definitely the deepest and most talented position on this team. One thing to consider is what a lot of the guys are saying is that in this offense that everyone's running more than they ever have before. In fact, back in the spring, Alex Ross, who's going into his senior season, even said as much. I've never run this much at the University of Oklahoma. And so I think they're trying to develop depth, and I think it maybe go possibly beyond these top 3 guys in Samaje Perine, and then Joe Mixon, and then Alex Ross. I think they're trying to add some depth just because of the amount of running that these guys are going to do. But I certainly think your top 2 guys are going to be Perine and Joe Mixon. The scouting reports just coming out, the things that you can hear on Joe Mixon are very good at this point. He's a quick runner. He makes sharp cuts. He hits the gap, or he hits the hole really hard. He's a different, it's going to sound crazy, but he's a different change of pace from Samaje Perine, who just happens to be the single-game rushing record holder in NCAA. So Oklahoma is definitely going to be good at running back. They're going to be deep at running back, but they're not going to necessarily be overall experienced at running back after you get past this top 3. And I really am curious to see how they use Alex Ross, because I think he's a guy that you can really exploit some mismatches if you can get his speed on the edge.
Sterling Shepard, of course, one of the very best in college football on the perimeter. He was sorely missed in a few games last season due to injuries. If you're going to run the 4 wides, you've got him in place. Then what else is there?
Yeah, I said back in the spring that Oklahoma has to go 8 deep at receiver, and that's a big question mark. I think one of the things that Oklahoma is doing to kind of help with that is they've got a guy at tight end in Mark Andrews, who I said, earlier he caught the touchdown pass from Trevor Knight. So I think you might see that the tight end position come back. It needs to come back. I mean, it honestly does. You're handicapping yourself if you don't have a tight end who can hit the seam. But they got some help from the junior college ranks. They signed D.D. Westbrook, who came in the spring, participated in the spring game, and really showed some flashes of what he can do. They had a guy just drop in their lap from junior college who came out of I'm forgetting the junior college he came out of, but he was a commitment to South Florida. And what happened was, I guess the way it works out with the credits, there weren't enough credits for him, or he had too many actually to transfer to South Florida. I guess, again, I'm not for sure how it works out, but South Florida said he had too many summer credits. OU said, well, that's just enough for us. So OU ends up getting a guy named Jarvis Baxter he was a top 50 JUCO recruit in the nation. He actually knew D.D. Westbrook, and when it didn't work out for South Florida, D.D. Westbrook said, hey, get a hold of Oklahoma. We'll take you. And I mean, that was true. He actually came as a walk-on. So you got 2 top JUCO recruits there that are going to, I think, pay immediate dividends for Oklahoma. You got a guy named John Humphrey who came in as a freshman. And then there are some holdovers. There's a guy like Deron Neal who's going into his senior year. This is a year, it's do or die now, really, for him, and living up to the expectations that he had when he came on campus. You got a tall guy in Jeffrey Mead, a 6'6", 189 type guy who can really do some things on the edge and stretch you vertically. There's guys there. There are bodies there. The quality of depth of those bodies is something that Oklahoma really won't know until September 5th, and maybe not even until beyond that, when the Sooners go to Knoxville to take on Tennessee.
Matt, fans love to hear that you're going with the passing offense, going to spread the field 4 wide, the whole deal. It's exciting, but it puts a lot of pressure on the offensive tackles. You lose both of those. You do have some experience coming back elsewhere in the line. How does that shake out?
Yeah, that's really outside of the receiver position. I guess you would say the offensive line is the big question mark. Nila Casatati is back at one of the guard positions, and then Ty Darlington is back at center. And then it's just kind of a hodgepodge of guys that Oklahoma is trying out at both the tackle positions and the other guard position. And I think it's one of those things that's going to play out okay for Oklahoma because you've got guys there who maybe lack starting experience, but they have game experience, and it's a experienced offensive line. As much as these guys have been in the trenches, they've played. There's a lot of talent there. One guy that I'm really high on, one of my favorites, is Orlando Brown. You may remember his father as an NFL player. Now he is coming in to Oklahoma, a big bodied person that I think maybe have a really good career at the University of Oklahoma. But there are, again, like every other position that Oklahoma is looking at, there's bodies there, but they've got to transition into on-field productivity. And I think offensive line may be a position where it may not even be solidified who those starting 5 guys are until either game week, or they're going to transition some guys in and out the first game of the season when Akron comes to town, just to give a bunch of guys a bunch of looks during a game type situation. And if there's a position you can do that with, it certainly would be offensive line. I don't think you want to rotate your quarterbacks. I definitely don't think you want to try to figure out who your running back is going to be during that first game. But I think offensive line is a position, if you've got a number of guys to choose from, that you can rotate them in and out on different possessions just to see what you're going to get from them.
Orlando Brown, Sr. of the infamous referee flag tossing incident.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah.
This is his son who actually, and this is kind of adds to that rivalry a little bit for the last 2 seasons. He was initially a commitment to the University of Tennessee, and then Oklahoma got him as kind of a coup on National Signing Day 2 years ago. And so it's going to be interesting to see if he can get into that starting role and actually play in Knoxville. That'll be kind of a fun storyline to add to it.
Matt Hofeld joining us from Crimson Cream Machine on the SB Nation platform for Oklahoma Athletics. Matt does some great work there. I was just checking out your rundown on different positions across the Big 12, so it's great for somebody like me who wants to cover everyone, know a little bit about everything, to jump on there, see how you rate the different positions and where Oklahoma fits. I was just looking at the linebackers, and obviously you've got one of the best in Eric Stryker, 17 tackles for loss, 9 sacks. Dominique Alexander, Jordan Evans, you're set at linebacker.
Well, you would think Oklahoma's set at linebacker, but here's the thing that you got to throw into that mix is that Frank Shannon is back this year after having to sit out last year from being suspended from the school, not from the team. He was suspended by the university last season. He's back and participating, and Bob Stoops a week ago mentioned the fact that you can really tell of his experience when he gets in there and works with the ones. And so if Oklahoma is going to run a 3 linebacker set, a 4-3 type front, so you've got Frank Shannon to add in that mix of Eric Stryker and Dominique Alexander and Jordan Evans, who sits out and who. So that's going to be an interesting storyline. I do agree with what your assessment that Oklahoma is deep at linebacker. I think they're probably the most talented linebacking core in the Big 12, but you got to question, do they change their defensive formation to get all 4 guys on the field, or do they just know you got really quality backup and you rotate defensive positions to keep guys fresh? That's going to be something to keep an eye on when it comes to this position.
And so the linebackers are strong and they're deep, for the best in the Big 12. And then the line appears to be a bit thin. Charles Tapper's a known commodity, so that would help out, obviously, up front.
Yeah, Charles Tapper is probably the most widely known name outside of Oklahoma circles. If you're covering from the Big 12 or covering from a national perspective, you're going to know about Charles Tapper going into his senior year. But then there's guys there. You just it's kind of like Charles Tapper and the gang, because you don't know for sure who's going to do what. Jordan Wade is one of those guys that they're talking about putting inside to replace what the Sooners lost in Jordan Phillips, who came out of after his junior year to go into the NFL. They've got to fill some spots there, and again, it's one of those situations, kind of like the offensive line, where there's not experience there when it comes to the number of career starts, but there is experience there to playing time, and those guys are going to have to transition from being reserves and role players to being full-time starters. And so because of that, you're going to look at guys like Matt Diamond. You're going to look at, we already talked about Jordan Wade. Matt Romar is another guy that you got to look, and just to see who's going to come in there and fill those gaps that are left behind. It's definitely, I would say, it's a big question mark, but even the secondary and the defense maybe even a little bit bigger, because Oklahoma struggled last year in the secondary, and they've got to make significant strides if they're going to improve on their record and they want to get back in where they're competing for conference champions. I think that secondary becomes more crucial as far as improvement goes.
Yeah, so they're going to mix and match there. They got Zach Sanchez. He's one of the best in the business in the Big 12, 6 picks last year. You've got one of the top safeties as well. Got to replace a punter and a place kicker. We get to the schedule, Matt. You go on the road to Tennessee. You took care of business there. It was actually a fairly close game, but you had a pick 6 that went back the other way, opened up that ball game against Tennessee. What I like about the conversation we're having versus the ones I have with every other conference, especially the ones with 14 teams. So you know the format. If you're playing in the Big 10, the ACC, or the SEC, you're playing your division. Then you only play 2 of the other 7 teams on the other side. And there is a huge disparity between playing maybe Georgia and Tennessee against one of your rivals in division, playing Vanderbilt and Kentucky. There are huge gaps in equality in regards to scheduling in the other conferences. In the Big 12, everybody plays everybody. I love conference championship games. I would love to see them across the board. But in a sense, this is a true championship in that everybody plays everybody.
Well, in theory, it would be. And I'll preface this by saying I do believe that the round-robin scheduling the way the Big 12 does it is probably the best way to do it because, like you're saying, everybody plays everybody. But if you think about it, this is a conference that prides itself on having, quote, one true champion, but yet it was the inability to name a conference champion last season that cost either TCU or Baylor an opportunity to be in the first ever college football playoff. Baylor should have been the conference champion, but they ended up having an equal conference record. Both of them only had one loss, with the caveat being that Baylor had beaten TCU earlier in the season. So by tiebreaker, you would think that the Baylor would be the conference champion, but the Big 12 would not announce a, quote, one true champion. They went with a co-champion, giving both Baylor and TCU a share in the conference championship. And if you're going to do it, you got to do it right. I mean, if you're going to do the round robin schedule, and again, I agree. I think that's the most difficult way to do it because everybody plays everybody. The Big 12 plays more conference games than most other conference teams like the SEC or the Big 10 or the Pac-12. But if you're going to have it this way, you got to have one true champion, and you can't go with this co-champion stuff that the Big 12 went with last year, because it really did. At the end of the day, the idea may be right, but the execution of that idea cost the Big 12 an opportunity to have a representation in the college football playoff because there was not one champion named.
We are totally on the same page there. So I like that everybody plays everybody because it is easy to determine a championship. So it's hard for me to believe that the Big 12 powers that be did not determine in the bylaws after the championship game could no longer be because of the departure of a couple schools that this is what we will do if there is a tie for the championship. And tiebreaker has always been the head-to-head tiebreaker has always been something that's been in place. Now, there have been conferences in the past that were too large for everybody to play everybody. There was a tie for the championship, and those two teams didn't play, so they had to have a co-championship. But in this scenario, just like you explained, Baylor, in my eyes, would have to be named the championship. What I think happened here, I'm guessing, is that the Big 12 kind of waffled because they were trying to second guess the College Football Playoff Committee and trying to figure out who are they going to look best upon. And it appeared throughout the season that TCU is being favored, despite that head-to-head loss to Baylor, that TCU is more the favored team. But I think the Big 12 was trying to second guess and think, when they get to the end, are they going to say, well, tiebreaker favors Baylor, so do we go Baylor or do we go TCU? And they never made a true determination of champion.
I think really what the conference was trying to do was they were trying to finagle their way to get two teams in. I think they wanted to try to get both Baylor and TCU in, and I think they felt as if they had a good shot because of the high profile of what those two teams were doing, particularly offensively, and it was a bad decision. I legitimately think, and I'm not alone in this, that the Big 12 would have at least gotten one team in. If you want to go ahead and say it was TCU, because I think at the end of the season, TCU was playing better football than what Baylor was. So give the Frogs the championship and let them go in. Or if you want to say Baylor legitimately earned it on the field, which they did, and you would think when you go look at tiebreakers, common sense tells you look at head-to-head. Baylor beat TCU, so Baylor should be a conference champion. But I really feel like the thought pattern from the Big 12 was we'll go co-champions and we'll get both teams in. I don't think anybody saw Ohio State coming. I don't think really anybody saw what was going to happen with Florida State, even though they should have. It was just a flawed plan, and the Big 12 shot themselves in the foot by not going out and doing what they should have done and named Baylor as the conference champion. So coming back around a full circle, I do agree. I think it is a great way to do it because, like we both said, you play everybody. You can look and see who played who beat who. Not every conference can say that, but if you're going to do it this way, you got to do it right. And the Big 12 tried to get the best of both worlds, and it ended up costing them. And I'm surprised that Bosley did not lose his job as the Big 12 commissioner over this. But hey, I'm just a little nobody who writes on a small website. You know what I'm saying?
Not to us, Matt. You were the guy. You're the guy to go to talk of Big 12 and Oklahoma football. There's no doubt about that. And from a national perspective, I just think it's shame. I didn't have any dogs in the hunt, and I think the other four teams earned it. But I think TCU and or Baylor earned it as well. Unfortunately, there's 4 spots in 5 conferences, so the math is flawed from the beginning. So before I let you go,
I mean,
Matt,
I think, yeah, go ahead.
Sure, go right to it.
I was just going to say, I think if one thing we learned outside of the Big 12's blunder is that I think this thing needs to expand to 8 pretty quick, away from 4. Go with 8 teams and throw a couple at-larges in there.
Yeah, so some people want an objective system. Some people want a subjective system that we currently have and really always have had. People will argue that the BCS was objective, but 2/3 of the formula was a vote, so it wasn't objective. Right. So some people want objective, some people want subjective. Look at the NCAA tournament. It's both. Why can't this be both? 5 conference champions automatically make it, then have a committee select the other 3 wild cards. You could do that.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you.
Before I let you go, Matt, expectations here on Oklahoma, what would satisfy you? What would satisfy the fan base?
Well, the fan base, I mean, this is a fan base that has been spoiled to winning, and that's a good position to be in. I don't think Oklahoma fans will be settled or satisfied with anything less than a championship. And I'm talking about starting initially with the Big 12 championship and getting into the playoff berth. Is that realistic is the question Oklahoma fans really have to ask themselves after last season. I think if the Sooners can win 10 games or more, then I think it's a step in the right direction. When you look at this, the youth of this team, you look at the guys that are going to be some of the most major contributors they're under. And so you get a 10-plus win season, win a bowl game, and you're at least moving in the right direction. I think another 9 wins or less is going to really – I think you're going to see the natives get restless, so to speak. But this is a team that a lot of people feel like is better than what the season with last year. They've got talent on both sides of the ball. And Oklahoma, whether it's the fan base or the team, someone's got to figure out what happened last season. And unfortunately, we can talk about it, we can write about it, we can cover it, but you really won't see, was last year an anomaly or there's some major issues. We won't know that until the team hits the field. And with all due respect to Akron, you really won't know that until the team travels to Knoxville. It's
very odd to me that 5 or 6 years after Oklahoma and Texas ran through a decade of dominating the Big 12, that the Big 2 are considered to be Baylor and TCU, one team that was a doormat, the other team that wasn't even in the conference till a couple of years ago, and that Texas and Oklahoma are somewhat underdogs in the Big 12. It's very strange. Matt Hofeld joining us from Crimson and Cream Machine on SB Nation. Matt, it's always a good time. Thank you, sir.
You bet, Mark. We'll talk to you soon.